I believe that I moved into a redemptive relationship with Jesus somewhere between the ages of 14 and 15. Before that was a time of what I like to call maybe progressive naive discovery. I was raised in a Christian home, brought to church every Sunday morning, Sunday school, church Sunday evening, Christian Boys Club on Monday night, and even Tuesday afternoons, teaching in theology called catechism. I picked up through much of that the concept that God is a judge, constantly watching me to catch me doing something wrong. It was also a time when I felt very much alone. The majority of the time I found myself on the edge of friend groups, partly because of my own actions, but that may be part of the reason why I had periods of depression, which increased into middle school years. But in contrast to that, the director of that Christian Boys group, he spent a lot of time with me and other boys, taking us on monthly service trips and working on special projects. But it was really out of that loneliness, I think, that I turned to Christ, and he did feel much of that need. So I would say my early good friendship with Jesus started probably around 14, 15. I would hear various places on the radio where people would say, if you truly accepted Jesus, your life would change. No more depression, no more of this. And that's what I expected. And so I tried it over and over. Each time my feelings did change. And finally, probably about age 15 to 16, I thought, you know what? Maybe I'm already there. And so I kind of moved past that, expecting life to be perfect. Increasingly in my teen years, I saw myself as a friend and a willing servant of Jesus. My servant's heart is not a surprise, since my father often volunteered a lot in our church and in other ways in the community for elderly people and others. In high school, I went on summer service trips. I visited residents in nursing homes with friends, was part of Bible study in my school. I led our church youth group. During college years, I volunteered with a man who needed a special friend. I worked at a Christian camp. I worked for a ministry in the national parks one summer. So during that time, I was learning a lot about God and Scripture in school and in church. I took voracious notes from sermons. Those were the early days of contemporary Christian music, and some friends and I really explored that kind of as an outlet compared to some of our other classmates that were partying to the hilt. During college, I began to explore sort of more the emotional and expressive side of my faith. I remember keenly the summer I was at Mount Rainier, working there, reading the fiction of Chaim Potok, and it was a lot of his fiction is about a Jewish boy who was trying to deal with his upbringing and separating himself from his parents, and that was a lot of what I was dealing with. It was kind of separating my faith from my parents' faith, and how I was going to be different, how I wanted to be different. Those years were also confusing. I experienced bouts of depression that I thought a Christian shouldn't have. I was treated pretty cruelly at a job that I have, with the stuff with Trump about locker room talk. And I've read some things where people have said, I've never heard that kind of locker room talk. Well, I didn't hear it in the locker room, but I heard it on the job. I've heard lots of pretty bad stuff. I was also confused by some of the leadership roles I was in. Tried innovative things, and some of it worked, and some of it didn't work. And it was during college. It was the first time I initiated and led a small group scripture study without any help. In seminary, I grew more understanding through my seminary classes, and through reading and experiencing serving in a variety of church roles. At the same time, I felt like I was spiritually parched. Some people call seminary cemetery, and that's a little bit what it was like spiritually. But periodically, it was an exception to the rule, but I would feel closer to God. I found myself enjoying ministry service, especially small groups I started and led. It was a bout of pneumonia and a injury to my back that I really learned that I'm not indestructible and I'm limited. Probably a good text for me that time was Psalm 25, verse 4. Show me your ways, Lord, teach me your paths. Now, a stronger good friendship with Jesus developed when I was probably around 26, 27. It found me planting a church in Sugar Land, Texas. Life was full with a young family, with the work of building and pastoring a young church. I made various attempts to strengthen my relationship with him, but much of that got squeezed out just by the stress of life, the stress of this church plant, the stress, all that on an introvert. And at about age 29, some challenges in church planting and my marriage pushed me to a greater dependence on God. It was then that I started periodic spiritual retreating. That propelled me into a busy time of greater growth. I led numerous groups, even switching to leading more specific discipleship groups in my 30s. But by mid-30s, it all seemed to unravel. I hit a huge wall. It shook the foundations of my marriage, of our family, affecting ministry as well. I felt desperate. Through therapy, healing prayer, spiritual direction, spiritual retreating, journaling, meeting with a pastor who had lost his own marriage, and more, it all pushed me into God's arms. Did I mention that I was desperate? I was desperate. I even gave up morning exercise to be able to spend more time journaling and in prayer because it didn't seem to have enough. One counselor really shared something that rocked my world, and this was this statement: I have great worth apart from my performance because Christ gave his life for me and therefore imparted great value to me. I'm deeply loved, fully pleasing, totally forgiven, accepted, and complete in Christ. That was just a huge thing for me to fathom, that was really true of me. So part of what got me out of this wall was actually giving up pastoring the church we had planted. That while on the one hand that felt like a huge weight was taken off my shoulders, on the other there were years of grieving after that, just dashed hopes, dashed dreams, dashed expectations. I think Psalm 63 verse 1 expresses it. You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you in a dry and parched land where there's no water. By the time I hit 40, I came to a place of a closer friendship with God. The ordeal with our marriage had lasted about roughly 5 years. And for that, just an idea of getting a fresh start, some other reasons, we sold our home and moved to a new house, just to say, hey, this is a new stage of life. Got into a new church, got into a small group that we participated in as a couple. In fact, we realized then it was the first time that Gina and I had ever been, my wife and I had ever been in a small group together as a couple. We had all been leading different small groups, but never as a couple. And I felt close to Christ that time. I was starting a leadership development program. I was finishing my doctorate. I was beginning ascending leaders. Romans 8 verse 15 was an important verse of intimacy that time. The spirit you received does not make you slaves, so to live in fear again. Rather, the spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship, and by him we cry, Abba, Father. It's that sense of God being a father. Accepting. The beginning of ascending leaders was scary when I realized that meant I was going to have to write curriculum, and I never was praised that much for my writing and didn't feel like I was a very good writer. But I felt if God was calling me to that, I was going to step into that. And we had a couple exciting years, and then the recession of 2008 hit. The next 4 or 5 years were just a real struggle. So much so that in 2012 we almost closed Ascending Leaders. And also another wall began to go up at that point, and that was just struggling with disappointment and feeling let down by colleagues and friends, especially with opening doors for ministry. I found myself vacillating between kind of this hanging on to God and being angry with God. You know, there's this really intimate wrestling with him. Somewhere along the way here, I've moved into a more Jesus as my confidant stage. Even though at times I felt ignored by him, I still clung to him. During that recession, especially 2012, I sacrificed deeply for the ministry that I still believe that God had called me to. In a strange way, I both did not understand God, but also shared with him deeply as I further confided in him, knowing that I had nothing else to depend on. There was a lot of stress over the ascending leader situation. and then along with some jealousies and resentments, pushed me back into to therapy again. But as I turned 50, God seemed to zap through in some big ways. After a few years without a small group, my wife and I began another couples group, which was going very well. And God opened doors for ascending leaders in ways that were a bit thrilling and a bit confusing, but just told me I needed to completely trust Him. Another challenge during this time was the continual calls in churches and in books and at conferences to be more, to do more, to serve more. At a time when I felt like I needed to focus and the sadness of walking past other people's needs, just because I knew I couldn't do everything. By age 52, I sensed God calling me to experiment with a new group called See You at the Wall. The idea of helping people who are recently at the wall get past the wall. And it was through that process, actually, that I discovered that a wall for me was just career disappointment and disappointment in relationships. And I've been working through some of that, and I think I have more work to do yet. I think John 15 verse 4 is a good verse. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. So there are still days when I go back to that kind of cordial friend stage, resentment, licking my wounds. But I expect to be growing deeper and deeper with Him. And I do really want to sacrifice more at the right moments, whether it's in ministry and friendships or in my family, to bring flourishing to other people's lives into my life. And I look forward to the growth that God is going to give me. But that's where I'm at right now.